The stars arrive tomorrow at 9 for the top television award show. Who'll be the favorite actor or actress? The best children and sports personalities. The top group or singer. Who's the favorite comedian? And who is the best male or female personality? Join host Des O'Connor for the TV Times Top 10 Awards tomorrow at 9 on ITV.
Following tonight's news at 10, there's a change to our advertised programme. In place of midweek sports special, we bring you the movie premiere, Final Jeopardy, starring Mary Crosby and Richard Thomas. This is Thames Television from London. Now today's national and international news from ITN.
Iraq says a shelter where hundreds of civilians died. America says we're sure the military also used it. The U.S. Defense Secretary says, right target, we regret the deaths. The government brings interest rates down 0.5%. And the schools that get the bad reports. Good evening. The United States and Britain said today they regretted civilian deaths in the bombing of a protected bunker in Baghdad. But they said the bunker had been used by the Iraqi military. The attack was accurate. It's thought hundreds of Iraqi civilians were killed. Western correspondents reported seeing more than 200 bodies, including women and children. The Iraqis said 500 died. The American military spokesman in Saudi Arabia said the building hit was an active military command and control bunker, a legitimate target, struck as planned. They'd had no indication it was being used by civilians. The White House spokesman, Mr. MARLIN FITZWATER, implied that the Iraqis might have deliberately put civilians into it. He said it saddened everyone to know innocent people may have died. The Iraqi health minister said it was a criminal, planned attack against civilians. Here, the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Hurd, said it was a great tragedy, but the responsibility lay heavily on President Saddam, who'd started the war. The American Defense Secretary, Mr. Dick Cheney, said tonight that Allied air attacks against Iraqi military targets would continue. And the American Navy said it was asking for 400 more Tomahawk cruise missiles to replace the ones fired so far in the Gulf War.
The Iraqi shelter was hit by 2 bombs, precision-guided munitions, according to the American military spokesman. The shelter of reinforced concrete is in a residential area on the western outskirts of Baghdad. 8 survivors of the attack were taken to Yarmouk Hospital. Our correspondent Brent Sadler's reports are subject to Iraqi censorship, though the Iraqis didn't cut or alter anything in tonight's. Some of the pictures are distressing.
If there was one place of safety to survive the Blitz of Baghdad, it should have been this purpose-built shelter. It was clearly hit twice because the points of bomb entry through thick, reinforced concrete were unmistakable. The explosions at one end of the bunker turned the structure into a giant furnace, incinerating those inside. While Iraqis were grieving over their dead, Washington claimed the shelter was an active command and control bunker, feeding instructions to the Iraqi army. The mayor of Baghdad was among officials here. He said this:
I can't tell you what's my reaction. Nobody can comment on that picture.
The regime is already using these disturbing scenes of trauma to attack the Allied coalition for the ongoing aerial bombardments. At one hospital, staff were trying to arrange the dismembered corpses into something recognizable. Most of these people may never be identified. But could it have been a mistake?
No, it cannot be a mistake because they hit the door first and then they hit the actual shelter second to make sure that nobody goes out alive.
ITN was taken deep inside the shelter to watch emergency teams recovering more bodies. Here I could freely inspect the damage. There was nothing obvious to suggest this building served as an important military center. I only saw blankets and human debris. Estimates of how many people were sheltering and died here vary widely. It was still fiercely hot many hours after the explosions, and plastic gloves melted into the hands of rescuers. The shelter is now being ventilated by huge pumps so we can see in here and breathe. It is boiling hot. There is a raging inferno somewhere back there, and they're saying that there are still many more corpses to pull out of here. No one may ever know just how many Iraqis were sheltering here during the air raid. Another unrecognizable victim was put into a blanket. I think it was the body of a woman, and they hurried outside with the remains. Distraught, hysterical people watched. At Yarmouk Hospital, young and blistered survivors spoke through the doctor of what happened.
He was asleep. Because all of a sudden there was a big blow, and he got up.
And then?
And then felt that the blankets were burning, and the whole place was smoke and fire. We were covered with a blanket, and we were hit by 2 blows. Rockets. And everything was converted into fire. They're all civilians. This shelter was specially made for civilians, and they thought that they would be in safe haven.
People gathered in Amaria for most of the day, mourning. It is impossible to find out exactly who was in the shelter at the time of the bomb blasts. But Washington's final word on this incident is that if it's Iraq's policy to put civilians into military targets, then Saddam Hussein is responsible for their deaths. Brent Sadler, News at 10, Baghdad.
Well, as we said, the Iraqis didn't censor any part of Brent Sadler's report, but we at ITN did edit out some scenes because we regarded them as too distressing to broadcast.
The official Algerian news agency called the attack a massacre aimed at the Arab nation. Tunisian radio said the ugliness of the aggression of the United States and its allies today reached new heights. The American Defense Department has been under pressure to explain why it did not know civilians were in the shelter.
In the voice of the American officer who briefed the press in Saudi Arabia this afternoon, no tremor of doubt about what was hit.
I'm here to tell you that it was a military bunker. It was a command and control facility. It's one of many that has been used by the Iraqi government throughout this operation. We have been systematically attacking these bunkers since the beginning of the campaign. Within the last 2 weeks, this particular bunker became even more active as a command and control facility.
Sources say 4 factors convinced Allied intelligence that this was a command and control center. The roof of the building had, they say, been camouflaged, the surrounding area left clear, and military vehicles had been observed outside. But most important, radio traffic had been picked up by Allied electronic surveillance. Tonight, the Pentagon made some of its evidence public.
We know a great deal about this facility. For example, we know that in the early 80s, during the Iran-Iraq War, this facility was constructed. But the key point is it was converted to a military command and control facility in the late 1980s. As a part of that conversion, it took over ownership by the military. There was clear and definite association with command and control equipment.
Many of the pictures of bomb damage that have reached the West support Allied claims that targets are identified with care. There have been civilian casualties, but nothing we know of on the scale of what happened last night, despite the fact that for 4 weeks targets all over Baghdad have been hit, including communication centers like radio and television buildings, government offices such as the Defense Ministry and the Ba'ath Party headquarters, the International Conference Center close to the hotel where Western journalists are staying, and the airport west of the city. But why didn't Allied intelligence reveal the presence of civilians in the bunker?
We can't detect everything. We don't have a 100% capable. Well, let me finish. They could have gone in after dark last night when we weren't up there looking. We had the airplane scheduled to come in to bomb it. But I think the overriding fact is, sir, that it was a military facility, and that's why it was bombed. We are chagrined if people were hurt. The only information we have on people hurt is coming out of a controlled press in Baghdad.
Some political fallout from so many deaths was inevitable. One Labour MP with this charge against the Foreign Secretary.
As he watched the television screen at lunchtime and saw the charred ribbons of women and children Swept out. Yes, swept out. Swept out of the air raid shelter in Baghdad. Did it occur to him that some of the blood of these innocent civilians was on his hands?
There's no doubt that war has its tragedies, and sometimes these can be great, even with the greatest possible care and precision. That is why the responsibility lies so heavily on someone like Saddam Hussein, who commits aggression and then refuses all peaceful invitations to reverse that aggression.
But the real concern, what impact this will have in the Arab world.
Well, it's bound to be used by Saddam Hussein, who's a master of propaganda, to increase his propaganda effect, and that will create problems. But in my view, most sensible Arabs know and understand that this monster, who has been responsible for killing more Muslims than any other single human being on earth, has got to be stopped. And the coalition, which is determined to stop them, will not be broken by this.
Senior Western officials have been expressing surprise about how well Arab support for the war has survived so far. But whatever the rights and wrongs of what happened last night, there's no doubt that it could have a profound impact on Arab public opinion.
The Americans are saying they don't want to hurt civilians, that they regret civilian deaths. But the Defense Secretary, Mr. Cheney, was insisting tonight the underground bunker was a legitimate target, and he said the bombs hit with great precision.
The White House was quick to justify the bombing. Civilian deaths were tragic, but the nature of the target was clear.
We will not target civilian facilities. We will continue to hit only military targets. The bunker that was attacked last night was a military target.
The U.S. says it doesn't know why civilians were in the bunker, but accuses Saddam of using them to shield his military.
We urge him once again to save his people and to comply with the UN resolutions.
We want to warn you right now, the pictures you're about to see are indeed graphic, and that everything...
The most graphic war images since Vietnam were broadcast to American homes by all 4 main networks this morning. There is little evidence of any change in the public's view of the war.
Well, it's pretty devastated, but it goes along with the war. It's too bad. There's nothing nice about war. Casualties happen, air raid shelters get bombed, schools get bombed, mosques get bombed. It happens.
Oh.
The scenes have shocked, but they'll not result in what one analyst calls the Vietnam effect.
The American people are not going to turn against this war until American casualties start to mount. We don't much care how many Iraqi casualties there are.
America's business community rallied round the Defense Secretary today. He expressed regret at the deaths, but no regret at the choice of target.
We did, in fact, drop 2 bombs on it. They hit with great precision, and there's no question in my mind or in the mind of our key people that what we hit was a military target.
But he hinted that the focus of the bombing may soon shift from Baghdad.
So we're now, I think, in a situation where we can increasingly shift our attention from those strategic targets inside Iraq and focus increasingly upon the ground forces that he's deployed in southern Iraq and Kuwait.
For Iraqi Americans, these are difficult days. Today, perhaps the worst.
If they will not die of the shortage of the food and the water, I'm sure they will be killed by that bomb.
I don't understand why they bombing my mom's family.
The president refrained from direct comment on the bombing, but the U.S. is well aware of outrage elsewhere. The administration is now trying to limit the political damage of last night's bombing, especially among its Arab allies, arguing that it hasn't exceeded the UN mandate, which allows for the use of force. Just how much force to use over Baghdad, though, will remain a key issue until the ground assault begins. Bill Neely, News at 10 at the White House.
In New York, the United Nations Security Council is meeting tonight for the first time since the beginning of the war it authorized. Members are voting about now on whether it should be an open public session or closed, as the United States and Britain wanted. The civilian deaths in Baghdad could mean a more divided Security Council.
News of the casualties in Baghdad fueled a war of words at the United Nations, where the Security Council was to sit for the first time since the war began. The Council last met in November, authorizing the use of force to remove Iraq from Kuwait. But an increasing number of countries believe the Allied bombing campaign has gone too far.
Because the whole bombardment of civilians has nothing to do with a resolution that was intended to liberate Kuwait and not to destruct Iraq.
Thousands of people are being killed because those bombs and those missiles are not being sent to the skies, but to a populated country.
But the Allies insisted that coalition planes are not targeting civilians.
The Allied forces are not targeting civilians. They are targeting only military establishments, and that if civilians are being killed, and of course we don't deny that there are civilian casualties, that is because often the Iraqis are sighting their military or other strategic targets somewhere where they are rather in close proximity to the civilians.
The US ambassador, Thomas Pickering, hopes to prove that by presenting documentary evidence to the UN Secretary-General, Javier Pérez de Cuellar. But he today deplored civilian deaths. In a statement, Secretary-General Pérez de Cuellar delivered a thinly veiled rebuke to the United States and Britain, saying he was dismayed by the magnitude of the casualties. But Britain and the United States remain unmoved. They are about to try to force the Security Council behind closed doors for the first time in 16 years. The move would stifle public criticism of the Allied campaign and represent a short-term tactical victory. But the war on the diplomatic front may be far from over. Kevin Dunn, News at 10 at the United Nations.
The Iraqi Foreign Minister, Mr. Tariq Aziz, is expected in Moscow on Sunday night, and he's to see President Gorbachev on Monday. Iraq, without giving anything away, has said it's ready to cooperate with the Soviet Union in its efforts to end the war.
It was the mission to Baghdad of the Soviet Special Envoy Yevgeny Primakov which led to the Iraqi decision to send their foreign minister here. Tonight, back in the Soviet Union, Mr. Primakov was saying very little about his trip and his meeting with Saddam Hussein.
You see, I don't want to jeopardize the process of negotiation for future. That's why I don't want to go deeper into details.
But Mr. Gorbachev's spokesman said the talks had given cause for hope. And tonight, the Kremlin is claiming credit for a new round of shuttle diplomacy. The Kuwaiti foreign minister will meet Mr. Gorbachev here tomorrow as part of a long-scheduled visit. But it's the expected arrival this weekend of Iraq's Tariq Aziz, last seen here in October, that's raised hopes.
We are trying to continue some kind of a dialogue with the Iraqis. We have tried to do it all along, and hopefully something will come out of it.
Mr. Gorbachev, who yesterday met the French foreign minister, has reiterated his criticism of Iraq. He told the French delegation that the blame for the war lay squarely with Saddam Hussein and his occupation of Kuwait. But military hardliners have been sharply condemnatory of America's action in the Gulf. Today, a KGB general accused America of going too far.
Конечно, война — это тяжелое событие всегда, но в данном случае, когда мы видим уничтожение людей, разрушение гражданских объектов, то возникает много вопросов.
The Communist Party newspaper, Pravda, ran an article today in which it said American tactics could help raise the corpse of the Cold War.
The finer detail of what will be discussed here has not yet been revealed, but the Kremlin is playing these talks up. Possibly amid fears of American expansionism in the Gulf, the Soviets see this as their chance to reassert some authority in the region. Penny Marshall, News at 10, Moscow.
RAF commanders in the Gulf say their latest laser targeting equipment is now operational. By tomorrow, all Tornadoes on bombing missions will be carrying precision bombs, they say. The Tornadoes have already had important successes in the past 2 days. In this report from the Gulf, certain operational facts have been left out for reasons of military security.
Daybreak in the Gulf, and as the sun rises, so once again do the Tornadoes. Side by side and heading north. With them go the Buccaneers, now routine partners in the bombing raids on Iraqi targets. The mission this morning, Iraq's hardened aircraft shelters, many thought to be housing the fighter planes yet to engage in the sky war. A Buccaneer navigator described the RAF's success against the shelters in the last 48 hours, specifically the difference between laser-guided bombs and unassisted so-called dumb bombs.
But you will see the effect
of selective bombing as opposed to blanket bombing. The bomb should be arriving shortly, and there you see it goes for the laser spot. Direct hit on the hardened aircraft shelter, and hopefully it will uphold it, and anything in there would be destroyed.
Air crews returning from their missions today say despite the Allies' air supremacy, they still know they're in danger.
They aren't getting any easier. I think now knowing what's out there, it's getting to the stage where you're not sure whether you want to go or not. You don't want to sit around and leave everybody else doing it and not do your bit, but it's getting harder to get in the cockpit each time.
A month into the war and the aerial onslaught continues. But what's yet to be fully revealed is the extent to which the bombardment has reduced Saddam Hussein's capacity to fight a ground war. Mark Austin, News at 10, with the RAF in the Gulf.
After the criticism, the government cuts interest rates 0.5%. Labour says that's too little, too late. A report next. Plus, too late for those having homes repossessed. And a schools report. Could and should do better. That's in a couple of minutes.
Is your motor insurer a dinosaur? Is your motor insurer a dinosaur? We'll hope to accept the first policy on offer. At Swinton Insurance, we offer a choice of policies from over 70 insurance companies. So your premiums should make you go yabba-dabba-doo. Swinton Insurance. We always give the motorist priority.
At KP, we remove every shred of skin. Because there's OK nuts and there's KP nuts.
To protect London, there are 38,000 tons of British steel in the Thames Barrier. Good job, too.
When I was a boy, I read as a boy. As I grew older, my tastes changed. Now I am a man, I read as a man. I want wit, ideas, style, and good writing. That's Esquire. Esquire, a better title for a man.
In looking at our business class, we could have had our seats like this. Very profitable for us, not so good for you. So on our 747 transatlantic flights, instead of making more room for seats, we've given our seats more room. Air Canada, it's a breath of fresh air.
SOS ATM. SOS ITS. Cool.
Look carefully at the public face an investment company shows. Has it come up with pensions, life assurance, and investments to fit your plans exactly? Has it provided attractive-looking returns again and again? And when the financial climate wasn't quite so good, did it still have the experience to produce a pleasing figure at the end of the day? Scottish Widows. Looking good for your money.
The Chancellor, Mr. Lamont, cut the cost of borrowing by 0.5% to 13.5%. The banks cut their base lending rates to match. The building societies said they wouldn't cut their mortgage rates until there was a further reduction.
For weeks now, the Prime Minister has been under huge pressure, not least from his own backbenchers, to ease the pain of recession by cutting interest rates. Today, the Chancellor made it clear that it was the certainty of inflation falling that had let him act. He was told this morning that there'll be another drop on Friday, and he said today that it'll probably be lower than his own forecast of 5.5% by the end of the year. But ERM membership had been the real key to today's interest rate cut and others that would follow.
Today's interest rate reduction and future reductions, when the time for them comes, can be made only when sterling's position in the ERM permits. That is, when we judge the reduction to be both sustainable and safe.
An interest rate cut was agreed with the Prime Minister last week as something that ought to happen as soon as possible. Conditions, government sources said, had proved right for action today. The Liberal Democrat spokesman, though, was certain it was all a matter of political expediency.
I believe that the interest rate cut today was timed because there was a debate today. And for however many days the Chancellor's been thinking about it, there's no doubt about it. He had politicians to his fingertips. He knew there was unease on the government backbenches. He wanted to provide some appeasement to that unease.
Just a cent.
The Shadow Chancellor seemed to agree, but was more concerned that today's action might have little real effect.
Even 0.5% cut is better than no cut. But there can be little doubt that it is too little and too late. Interest rates should have been cut before the end of last year, and in the absence of such action, by 1% today. A 0.5% cut will bring no relief to the hard-pressed mortgage payers, and it will be seen as inadequate by most of industry and commerce.
Tonight, many Tory MPs are much happier, though they won't fall over themselves with joy until there have been further interest rate cuts. Ministers are denying that there's been any politicking going on, but many MPs and many city analysts too reckon that what's happened today makes a June election that much more likely. Michael Brunson, News at 10, Westminster.
There are some in the city who feel that the timing of the interest rate cut was wrong. They believe the Chancellor hasn't stuck to his hard line on inflation and sustaining the pound in the exchange rate mechanism. Sterling will fall if lower interest rates make it less attractive to foreign investors. Because the government is now under the discipline of the ERM, it's supposed to keep the pound stable and not cut interest rates if that affects the pound too much. The ERM allows the pound to move between an upper and lower limit. After joining, the pound was worth just over 3 German marks, but then fell steadily towards the lower limit. Norman Lamont said on December the 12th, when the pound was worth 2 marks 87, there was no question of a reduction of interest rates that is not fully justified by our position in the ERM. At the end of the year, when the pound was at 2.88, he said again interest rates would only be reduced when there is no risk to our position within the exchange rate mechanism. This morning, the pound was barely higher at 2.89.5, and yet Mr. Lamont did cut rates. With industry in recession, he had been under intense political pressure from his backbenchers to reduce the cost of borrowing. Sir Alan Walters, once Mrs. Thatcher's advisor, and 5 other leading economists, today even warned of a 1930s-style slump. But today's move is not enough to help homeowners. The building societies can only reduce mortgages if there's at least 1% off the cost of borrowing.
The difficulty, though, as far as the domestic market is concerned, is whether or not the reduction will hold. We'll have to see what effect it has on sterling. And until the position is clearer, I think you will find that building societies and other lenders will hold the position at the present mortgage rate.
The Chancellor has not done quite enough to please companies and homeowners. At the same time, he's risked his credibility with the foreign exchange markets by appearing to cut rates not according to strict ERM rules, but for political reasons.
The building society certainly suggested the interest rate cut will do nothing yet to help homeowners with mortgage repayments. The number of people having their homes repossessed for not meeting their repayments doubled last year, according to a report to be published tomorrow by the Council of Mortgage Lenders.
Pierre Chole's problems only began when he lost his factory job through ill health a year ago. He and his wife had just bought a one-bedroom house for £57,000 on a 100% mortgage. The family soon got behind with their repayments. Now they owe the building society more than £6,000, and their home's due to be repossessed next week.
It's very worrying, especially with the baby, another baby on the way. It's really worrying. You know, hardly any money to go around. On income support, we don't get a lot of money. Bills to pay, the mortgage just really took a back seat.
fact that today's interest rate cut could mean easier mortgage repayments soon is of little comfort to the Choles.
A bit ironic, isn't it, really? Well, it's too late for us, but it'll help other people, so, you know, that's the main thing, I suppose. But it would have been nice if it was a bit earlier. But as I say, it's too late now, so there's no point sort of dwelling on it, right?
With the bailiffs due to move in next week, the family are hoping the council will find them somewhere to live. But housing officials say they're limited in what they can offer.
At the moment, the only temporary accommodation that we have available for you is bed and breakfast, which I have to say is 16 miles from the town.
The Choles have no doubt attempting to buy their own home was a mistake.
You know, people said it was a good idea. We didn't really know we were first-time buyers. We went along with the flow quite a lot, and you know, I wouldn't do it again.
It's the first time I've actually settled down and done something responsible. Buying a house is a big step. Having getting this far, and through no fault of my own, I've lost it. So yeah, it's upsetting, it's very worrying.
For the time being, the family still have a home of their own until the bailiffs move in. John Draper, News at 10, Hertfordshire.
The standards of teaching are poor in a third of English classrooms, the school's inspectorate reported today. Apart from a slight improvement in the secondary schools, things are no better than they were a year ago, it said. Reading standards are unsatisfactory in 1 in 5 primary schools.
After a damning report last year, the inspectors have tried to be more optimistic, but with little success. This comprehensive in Kent is one of nearly a third of schools where standards are unsatisfactory. It's badly built, has few books, and there's another problem.
I think they should get more teachers in. Like, sometimes we hardly have any teachers. When teachers aren't in, they ask other teachers to come in and do it for us, but if it gets too hectic, they have to close the school.
The inspector's report says there's no evidence that standards are actually falling, but the quality of education in 30% of primary schools is poor, and in 28% of secondary schools. The inspectors also say standards of reading in 20% of schools are seriously worrying.
Nothing is acceptable if any child with something as basic and important as reading, because of problems in the school, fails to become a good reader. So we're clearly not saying it's satisfactory. We're saying it could be changed for the better by some of it, by the efforts of the schools themselves.